Well, with the release of the Dead Space remake this month, we now have 6 games in the Dead Space franchise, most of which considered some of the greatest survival horror games of all time, and others not so much. So how do they stack up from worst to best? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Game Chamber and my ranking of the Dead Space franchise. For those that have not already seen it, I have reviewed the new Dead Space remake in full. I also have multiple live streams covering my first playthrough of the remake, and now it is time to talk about this entire franchise. Now, Dead Space on one hand has been one of the most consistently great survival horror franchises, and on the other, they have taken some pretty weird and wild swings that have had not so good of a reception. So it's going to be an interesting ranking. I don't think it's going to be anything too wild, too many hot takes, but there are some passionate fans out there. So if you're a fan of Dead Space, please let me know your ranking down below in the comment section. Let's debate our difference of opinion. Coming in at number 6 is going to be Dead Space Ignition. And this is a game that I believe came out for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. And it's essentially like a puzzle version of the Dead Space games. It acts as a prequel to Dead Space 2, so the best part about it is getting some of that prequel storyline about what happened on the Sprawl before Isaac Clarke landed there, and it does give some interesting context of just kind of expanding the story of that incredible game. But as far as gameplay, when you come to Dead Space, you come for survival horror. You come for the intensity, the atmosphere, the shooting, the ammo scarcity, all the things that we come to survival horror games for. And this is just a collection of puzzles, tower defense, things like that. Not exactly a Dead Space experience. And so while if you like puzzle games, I could see you maybe getting a bit of a kick out of this, but the demographic and the type of gamer that Dead Space is going after and marketing itself towards, not exactly the types that tend to like puzzles over survival horror. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Dead Space Extraction, which originally came out on the Nintendo Wii, and it's absolutely a Nintendo Wii game. Obviously, they couldn't do the exact same experience that we had on the other consoles in transferring the Dead Space franchise to the Wii, and so essentially what you get here is a rail shooter. And rail shooters have some merit. Of course, those of us that grew up in the old arcade days, like House of the Dead, there's some fun to be had with that. But all of the intensity, all of the tension, everything that the Dead Space games are known for doing so well is pretty much non-existent here, because it's just shooty, shooty, bang, bang, and no matter how many necromorphs come at you, you never really feel overwhelmed or scared or tense, because you know you can just take them out with a little bit of aim. Not a whole lot of challenge, certainly not an entry into the Dead Space franchise that gets celebrated too much for a reason. Coming in at number 4 is going to be the oh-so-beloved Dead Space 3, and you know what? This might be the hottest take that I have on this video. I think Dead Space 3 is underrated. Is it as good as the games above it? Fuck no. There's a reason why it's number 4. Was it the right decision to make? Was it the right direction to take this franchise? Fuck no, because there was 10 years after this game where nobody wanted to even talk about Dead Space, except for us fans that were going, "Bring it back, bitches!" But when I played through this game with my brother, I had a good time. And at the end of the day, a comedy might not be a great movie, but if it makes you laugh, is it a good comedy? A horror movie might not be the best movie in the world, but if it scares the shit out of you, is it a good horror movie? I present the same question to a game. Is it the best direction to take a Dead Space game to remove a lot of the horror elements and replace it with Gears of War style cover shooting action? No. But was it fun? Yeah. It expands on the story of Dead Space 2 in some interesting ways, follows up those characters in some interesting ways, and tries to expand the lore and the world of Dead Space in a bit of a different tone, and there is some entertainment value to be had with that, but it's really just because of how great the other Dead Space games are that this game is so hated. If this was the first Dead Space game, it would probably be something that a lot of gamers and a lot of critics would have liked quite a bit. It's just by comparison to some of the greatest survival horror games of all time that most people despise this game because it just doesn't measure up. The shooting mechanics, the cover mechanics, they're performed well enough. All of the co-op action I actually thought was pretty fun. Like I said, played through this with my brother, and I miss gameplay segments like that. I miss having games where you can sit and have couch co-op. That is the biggest casualty of modern gaming, in my opinion. but it's not a scary game. It's not an intense game. It doesn't have any of the classic elements that was done so well that the Dead Space franchise became known for. And so it's kind of just this weird chapter, this weird bump in the road that hopefully we can look back on and start to look a little bit more mildly on some of the things that this game actually did right. And now that we have the Dead Space remake and now Dead Space is on fire again, maybe we'll get a remake of Dead Space 3 eventually that will retool that story and retool what they were trying to do in a much more palatable way for the fan base. Coming in at number 3 is going to be the original Dead Space, and I actually missed the boat on this game. I believe it came out when I was a senior in high school. There was something going on, maybe I was working, but I remember renting this game because everybody was raving about it. I played through maybe the first 2 hours, and then I had to take it back because I just didn't have enough time to play it, and just time got away from me. I did not become a fan of this franchise until Dead Space 2 came out, and I was addicted to that game. Eventually went back, revisited the original Dead Space, and experienced what everybody was raving about, and there is so many things about this original game that merits all of the praise that it got. One of the best atmospheres and settings for a survival horror game in history. The USS Ishimura is up there with like the Resident Evil Spencer Mansion. Of course, the shooting mechanics, the things that they did to make this really stand out on its own, to where you actually have to peel apart these necromorphs by shooting their limbs, not going for the traditional headshots like pretty much every other survival horror game out there. Very interesting change up of the gameplay. The creature designs, the sound design regarding the necromorphs was awesome, and continuously getting new forms of the necromorphs throughout the game. Really good boss battles, save for the last one. Never been a big fan of the last chapter of this game in this one or the remake, but it's such a good story, such a good atmosphere, and such a different flavor while delivering that classic survival horror experience, which cemented Dead Space as the greatest modern survival horror franchise. The only things that hold this game back for me is that I don't necessarily like the way that they segmented the ship off into chapters. That's one thing that I loved that the remake did, was make it more of an open world backtracking ability. I also felt like the zero-G segments did not age very well, especially when you play Dead Space 2 first and then go back to this and all you can do is just point and shoot across in a horizontal line to different areas. And of course, like I said, the last chapter of this game I've always felt like was a giant whimper of an ending. And finally, I just hate it. I hate it when your protagonist is a silent protagonist, especially when he's interacting with characters the entire game. It always throws me off and is so awkward that he never responds or has any kind of dialogue. I think that it stunts the growth of the character, it impedes your ability to really identify with that character, and it just so many things about that stylistic choice that I'm just never a fan of. Another thing that I was so glad that they changed when they remade this game. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Dead Space 2. And this was one of my absolute favorite games from the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 era. I adored the way that they expanded the lore. I loved the setting of the sprawl. I think that the game plays so much better. I recently replayed all 3 of these games just before the remake came out, and immediately finishing Dead Space 1 and starting Dead Space 2, the fluidity of the controls and some of the changes was just such a huge improvement, while not being a gigantic change. Maybe a little bit more of an action-centric feel to it, but still very much rooted in survival horror. Love the fact that Isaac actually became a speaking protagonist, much better character in this one. I like the interactions that he has with other side characters. Some you're not sure if they're on your side or not. Eventually some are revealed to be on your side, kind of playing on your expectations from the first game, where by the end of it, it seems like everybody's out to fuck you over. The expansion on not only the number of necromorphs, but the type of necromorphs. Again, really good boss battles, really cool segments. Loved how they changed up the environment and the feel of different areas of the sprawl, where the Ishimura is an amazing setting, but it is very one note for the most part. This one has a lot of different feels to it, which to me, a really good expansion for a sequel. There's not a whole lot negative I can say about this one. Maybe the atmosphere and the tension was better in that original game, I can give it that, but this is more my type of survival horror experience. So until very recently, this was easily undisputed the best of this franchise. But coming in at number 1, and this is no recency bias whatsoever, is the Dead Space remake. This to me took everything that was great about the original Dead Space, as well as everything that was such a great expansion in Dead Space 2 and molded it together to give us the greatest Dead Space experience that we have had yet, and a phenomenal jumping point for what hopefully will be a grand new chapter and new era in Dead Space games in this franchise, and a phenomenal jump off point for hopefully a brand new awesome era of Dead Space games. Whether or not they want to just directly remake Dead Space 2 and then revisit Dead Space 3, or they just branch off from here and tell brand new stories, either one of those paths I'm totally on board for, totally excited for. But the way that you get the graphical upgrade here, the way that you have Isaac as an actual speaking character, just expanding on the story and expanding on the character dynamics that were already great and present in that original game, changing up some of the gameplay that maybe aged poorly or maybe was never all that good in the first game, and really modernizing it in a very subtle way, like the little rail shooting segment where you're trying to link up with computers and shoot asteroids. Such a better version of that gameplay segment than the little Millennium Falcon segment in the original game. I think that the necromorphs, as well as the weapons, the graphics as far as just peeling these things apart and blowing them in half and shooting off limbs and using things like the force gun to just launch their skin and their muscular tissue off. Such a cool modern graphical upgrade. Being able to travel and backtrack across the entire Ishimura at any point in the game after you've unlocked certain segments just really opened up that shit, made it feel like this living, breathing environment, adding side quests, adding a lot more collectibles, much more replay value in this game than in the original for me, which I'm a fan of replay value. If I love your game, I want to keep playing it. I want to go for the platinum trophy, and I have been playing this. I'm on my 4th playthrough in just a couple of weeks. I love this fucking thing. To me, this is one of those examples, like the Resident Evil 2 remake, that takes a proven classic and does nothing but improve upon it. It enhances things, it expands things, it replaces some elements that haven't aged well or were never all that good with a modern gameplay mechanic that is a proven mechanic, and just really gives you the ultimate definitive experience of what they were going for with that modern game, to the point where old school fans can revisit this and just love revisiting all the stories, all the different environments, seeing the subtle little changes that are thrown in there to throw off people that know the Ishimura and know the chapters of this game like the back of their hand, while also giving an experience to those that might be jumping into this franchise for the first time that is going to grab them by the throat and instantly make them go back and try to find and replay those original games, all of which pretty much are on Game Pass, by the way. So to me, this is not only the best Dead Space game, it's one of the greatest survival horror experiences that I've ever had. It is a huge contender just 2 months into this year for Game of the Year, and it's going to take a hell of a game to dethrone it. And so despite how incredible a couple of these games on this list are, some of the best of all time, this easily for me is number 1. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for a playlist of my Dead Space coverage thus far. And I'm also going to put my recent God of War ranking up here if you're a fan of that franchise. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss my continued coverage of Hogwarts Legacy and Resident Evil 4 that's just around the corner, baby. And as always, remember, the Game Chamber is Commander Shepard's favorite channel on the YouTubes.